Can you imagine driving down South Lamar or South Congress or Burnett or any corridor in Austin and seeing 8 and 9 story buildings on either side of you? Well, that is what could possibly be in store for the city of Austin in the coming years. We interviewed Chris Affinito and Austin Stoll at our RealtyHack Summit on January 18th, and we asked them all the questions about what's recently passed and what is proposed to be passed in the coming months. Check it out and let us know in the comment section what you think about these proposed changes.
And one of the reasons I wanted to have this panel here is there's so much misunderstanding of what's going on in city zoning, and like I think I'm probably more informed than a lot of people. And I was telling Chris, we had a conversation, one of my neighbors thought was going to happen to his house, and he was like, no. So before we get into that, Austin, will you give us a brief history of the zoning in Austin?
That's a long, complicated question, but our typical current zoning platform that we all operate off of came out in the mid-'80s, so we're talking 40 plus years in terms of what we operate off of. And currently what's going on in council and what has recently passed is the first opportunity that we've had in the last 40 years to significantly change the infill zoning code. We actually have the momentum when it comes to the makeup of council, and we actually have a majority on there that is pro-new housing and pro-change. When we have a legacy of development management in Austin that focused mostly on, like, if you don't build it, they won't come, and that's been the legacy of our zoning code, and we've seen what that's done to affordability. So we are making the first significant changes when it comes to what is allowed under single-family zoning for the first time in the last 40 years.
And tell us, Chris, tell us what the last zoning change resolution was that was at September?
You mean CodeNEXT?
No. The last one, the resolution that was passed
home initiative, yeah,
with the smaller lots.
Mm-hmm. So the home initiative is one that got a lot more publicity than a lot of the other things that are in the works that might be more appropriate to like commercial and multifamily, and that's just because it's more tangible. It's just a little bit easier to wrap your head around. But essentially what it is we're taking all of our single family zoning. So that's zoning in SF1, SF2, SF3, so almost every, house. And now all of a sudden you went from being able to build 1 unit or sometimes 2 units, and if you could build 2 units, there's a lot of restrictions about how you can build them. Now we can build 3 units on all of those zoning districts.
And what's the minimum lot size?
The minimum lot size is the same as it was. So for SF3, that's 5750. For other zoning districts, it might be different. Phase 2 of the home initiative, which is coming this spring, is when they're going to contemplate reducing the minimum lot size.
And is that what they're talking about, going to 2,500?
Maybe. I mean, Houston is 1,400, right? So they're looking at their peer cities and saying, what are other people doing? I don't know if they'll go down all the way to 1,400, but going down to 2,500 would not make us an outlier as far as what our minimum lot size is.
So if you have a 5750 lot, right now you can build 3 units on that.
Right now you can, yes.
Okay. And so, Austin, with CodeNEXT, the idea was, correct me if I'm wrong, where you've got a major artery like Lamar or Burnett. The idea was that you could build more within a few blocks of that.
Yeah, to really understand kind of where we're going, I think it's important to understand where the history of CodeNEXT is. Kind of the original intention was to fundamentally change the zoning code in Austin. Currently, we have all of these categories, SF1, SF2, SF3. What CodeNEXT was going to do is completely replace our existing zoning code. There was opponents to CodeNEXT as it was finally reaching this momentum to get passed that sued the city, and due to the requirements for notification, I think there was a miscalculation on city legal staff in the sense that they thought that they didn't actually have to notify because they're just changing the zoning code. Well, if you rezone a property, state law requires you're supposed to give everybody that is affected by that zoning notice. The city did not notify people, and so that was ultimately the death nail in the coffin when it came to CodeNEXT. And so that's where we are now with the home initiative. obviously the city of Austin has moved the tides in the sense that they want to actually build more housing and change supply and demand, change the way and make it easier to build houses. CodeNEXT was a goal, but honestly, I was kind of disaffected with the entire CodeNEXT process because it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. Our code is imperfect, but at least it's manageable. The new CodeNEXT was going to be really complicated. What they're doing with the home initiative is working exactly what we have right now, which is working with the code that we already know. And what they've done is that they were smart about this, knowing that we will inevitably have lawsuits of people that are opposed to the zoning code, including primarily a leader named Fred Lewis, who actually doesn't even live in Austin anymore, but he led these lawsuits. So they notified, out of an abundance of caution, notified everybody, if you own a home in Austin, you got a letter saying that this home initiative was going to get voted on. We also had a joint venture meeting when it comes to council and the planning commission to make sure that all seats were at the table when it went through and passed, and actually passed this initiative. And so that means that this is actually likely to pass. CodeNEXT was already kind of on, it was really contentious. I think the city has crossed all their T's when it comes to this. So when it goes into effect, I think it was 60 days from the date it was voted on, which will be, I think, February 5th. Most certainly, I think we'll have opponents that come out against it, but I think that ultimately, the goal of 3 units per lot is the primary movement inside this zoning change. Again, this is going to be phased. I think the people that are pro-housing that wanted changes to the zoning code are picking their battles smartly this time, in the sense that we're having incremental change. So the first being is that we're going to talk about how many units you can do by right. The 3 units by right was something everyone could get behind. When it comes to the minimum lot size and what impervious cover limits are, that is more contentious, and so that I think will be taken over in like this phase 2 that we're going to be working on.
Got it. So raise your hand if you know anything about compatibility setbacks. Yeah, so this is really important. Chris, I'm going to let you take this one because we've talked about this in length. So what is a compatibility setback, and how does that affect our zoning as it is right now?
Okay, so let's pick a corridor like South Congress. And on South Congress, like most corridors of that size, zoning generally on the corridor allows for 60 feet of height. Compatibility setbacks are an overlay on top of what the zoning for that site allows that changes the height that you can actually build to when you're in close proximity to single-family houses or single-family zoning. So when it's, again, this is a relic of our 1984 code, and you've got a lot of lots on these corridors, and South Congress, again, is a great example, where you might have 150 or 200 feet of depth from the road itself, and right behind you, you've got a house. So you might be thinking that we should be able to build 60 feet or 5 stories here, except that that house is going to cut into what you can build, and it's going to be a sliding scale that goes up. And so depending on how far away from that house you are, you may be able to get 2 stories or 3 stories. And so when you look at the new development on Congress, like Music Lane, and you see that that's only 3 stories, and you might be wondering, why did they not build it bigger? It's because of compatibility.
Yeah, so what that means, guys, is that if you're at a commercial lot and you're within 200 feet of a house, that limits how high you can build. And so tell us the history of, or not the history, but the proposals of, well, and first of all, how does our compatibility setback compare to the rest of cities in Texas?
Yeah, well, cities in Texas and cities nationally, look at our peer cities in Texas, but you also look at Denver and Seattle and Portland and anything that you might consider to be a peer city. And we are an extreme outlier as far as how restrictive our compatibility setbacks are. The easiest way to visualize it is to imagine sort of a diagonal line, right? So like you start with a house, and the shallower your angle is, it's like the longer it takes before you can have more height. So Austin's kind of looks like that. It's a shallow angle. If you look at Denver's, they have compatibility, but it's like almost straight up,
And so what is in the works for the next few months when it comes to compatibility setbacks?
So council has passed a resolution to ask the housing department to come up with a draft ordinance about changing compatibility to be more in line with our peer cities. That was the directive. What the housing department has come out with and recommended to city council was essentially taking compatibility, which right now actually ends at 540 feet. Although, when you're that far away, you can build, oftentimes the height limit is higher than your zoning is anyway, right? So at 540 feet, you may be limited to 180 feet of height, and that's irrelevant because your zoning only allows you 60 feet of height. But what they're talking about doing now is ending compatibility completely at 75 feet from the triggering house. So if you've got a lot and it's 150 feet deep and it backs up to a single family house, the 150 feet closest or furthest away from that house is completely unaffected by compatibility. Your height on that part of the lot is going to be whatever your zoning says it is. And then the part that is closer to the house that is still subject to compatibility, they're taking that angle and they're making it a lot more vertical.
That's confusing, right? So basically we've got a zoning that allows for 60 feet high, okay? And then the compatibility setback says, no, you can't do that because you're close to a house. Now, how likely is that to go through?
At this point, a lot of these, and they're grouping this into what they call density bonus conversations. A lot of these ordinances that they're going to take a vote on are coming from the same sort of criteria as home. So anybody who, Travis County judges have ruled more than one time now that changing zoning code like this is the same thing as changing a property zoning. Therefore, literally everybody in the city needs to be notified. And so right now we have the impetus to do this because when you have less of a majority on city council that is in support of resolutions like these, any one neighbor can, well, not any one neighbor, but any group of neighbors can come together and file a petition. And if they have enough of the square footage around a property that's going to be rezoned, in this case, literally every property in the entire city, it becomes what's called a valid petition. That's the state law that Austin is talking about. And if you have a valid petition, it requires a 75% supermajority on city council. This is why CodeNEXT died, is because they had a 7-4 simple majority, and they knew that there's no way that they were going to get to a 9 out of 11 supermajority, and so they didn't even bother taking it up. Now they have that 9 out of 11 supermajority, and so they're going to follow these new notification procedures, including having this joint meeting of City Council and Planning Commission, which qualifies as notification. And just in case that's not good enough, they're sending out mailers to everybody in the city at a cost of $350,000 per mailer, making doubly sure that they've notified everybody in the city. And then whoever wants to submit a valid petition can submit their valid petition, but they know that they're going to have at least 9 votes for this anyway, and so they're going to override the valid petition.
So that is a significant change to the zoning. I mean, it would be huge, which would mean that, so first of all, this is not in conjunction with like major corridors either, right?
No, it's important to note, understand that we've got 2 different functions that are going on simultaneously. And the reason they're happening simultaneously is for the first time in my life, we have consensus on council and a direction that they want to go. Normally we've had kind of like an A-B, minority majority. Most people are in disagreement, and there's rarely enough of a majority, particularly in a pro-growth, pro-housing situation, to actually effectuate any sort of change. And for the first time ever, we now have this supermajority of 9, and I think that we're trying to take advantage of that right now. While there is that momentum to make sure that, and do 2 things at once. One is manage the single family zoning side of things, and the other is to manage what Chris is talking about in terms of these corridors and compatibility and kind of the exercise and stupidity that compatibility is, because it really, as he mentioned earlier, negates the whole purpose of zoning, which is to have certain heights in certain districts. But if you have a compatibility rule that allows you to limit it up to 540 feet away, most sites are not even near that size. You essentially negate the entire zoning goal to begin with.
So give us an example of a lot, okay, that how it would change, and I've got one in mind, and what that would look like compared to now, compared to later down the year.
So, Austin, do you want to take a stab at that on the single-family side and what that would look like for a residential lot, and then I'll replicate that for a commercial lot on a corridor?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, if you look at kind of the typical path of gentrification and growth in Austin and what the typical market product was, I think historically what I've seen is typically duplexes. People buy properties that have large lots and then build a duplex where they're attached. And the reason that they do that is because they want to deliver 2 moderately sized units, right? So 3-bedroom, 2-bath, which is typically what people are looking for. And so the only way to do that is because the current zoning code allows you kind of 3 options. You can either build a single family house, you can build a duplex, which you're not limited on the size of those particular units, or you can build a house and an ADU. And that's what we've seen historically over the last decade. A lot of these little condominium regimes, whether it's an A-B unit where those typically are 2,000 square feet, and then or now we see this house plus ADU, and those get condoed off, or kind of the final stage of that growth as prices rise in a certain area is to sell those off together or just build a giant house, which is what we see mostly in like 78704 right now. Now with the new code change, I think what we're going to see is optionality. What has happened will likely happen. I think what the code though has definitely incentivized a change to getting more units and more housing units out of it. So the new code will allow 3 units by right. You're not going to be limited to this 1,100 square feet, which is really difficult to get a 3-bedroom unit inside an 1,100 square foot floor plan. But if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, you're going to be allowed to do 3 units. But if you do 3 units, you're exempt from certain rules, one of which is McMansion, which is the most stupid rule that we all operate under, called McMansion or Subchapter F. All sorts of limitations on design. You're completely exempt from it if you're delivering multiple units, so that's a huge advantage.
If you do 3?
If you do more than 1, so if you do 2 or 3, you're exempt from McMansion. So that's a huge thing for everyone to understand, is that if you build multiple units, you'll be exempt from Subchapter F.
Okay, so wait, one question about that. There's FAR,
Right.
which is McMansion, but
Correct.
then there's also impervious cover.
Correct.
What will impervious cover be?
So currently the bargain that we've made is that impervious cover will remain at 45% currently. That will be considered in the second round of the home initiative, and because there's certain things you can do to mitigate impervious cover, whether it's rain gardens, et cetera, rainwater retention. But ultimately you're going to end up with the FAR limitations, which is 0.4 of the lot size currently. As you go up in unit count, that will adjust to 0.55 for 2 units and 0.65 for 3 units. So again, you can build larger units that meet market demand. The goal, as just from a marketing perspective, you're more likely to be delivering like 3-bedroom, 2-bath type units. You might even be able to put in a garage instead of a carport or whatever it may be. There's still going to be some design limitations, but you're incentivized to build multiple units. You won't have to deal with McMansion. You can do 3 units. You still have to make sure that the impervious cover lines up, but you're not forced into, if you want to build 2 units and sell them off separate, into this large house ADU at 1,100 square feet or an attached wall, which those of us that sell real estate know that that's a challenge to sell compared to just a fee simple type house delivery.
And what do you think that's going to do to values of lots?
I think long term, it could affect the values of lots. I think right now, everybody that is in development that's doing any sort of spec development recognizes lot values have completely taken a hit as interest rates have risen. I think it's less about the specific value of those lots as much as the ability to give yourself options. And I think that when you have more options, sometimes the value goes up. I don't necessarily foresee like a huge, massive increase, but I think it does give a lot of flexibility in the products that we can deliver both as developers and as we represent our clients when we're selling their lots. And I think that gives a much more marketable option for people that want to deliver a product that people actually want. People want detached single-family housing that is big enough for a family to live in. And our current code, it almost fights against that unless you're building a really large, expensive house. So
the difference in values a lot may be negligible, but affordability-wise, that more inventory means more affordability, right?
Yeah, I think affordability is kind of an interesting, it's a perspective base. It depends on where you are. Obviously, we have costs of construction that our debt costs have gone up and construction costs have gone up at the same time. And I don't foresee construction costs going down anytime soon. But I think it depends on where you're at in the city, but having options on what you can deliver is great. Currently, if I want to take a large lot, let's say 12, 15,000 feet in Zilker, the math works out that you're going to be trying to deliver something that's $3 to $4.5 million, whereas you might be able to cut that in a third and sell off 3 of them. So that's I hesitate to call $1 million affordable, but I think that same thing applies to different areas of town, different price points on the entry level of the lots. But I think that we have consensus to try and reduce the friction that causes cost to rise on the supply side. And that's the first time that that's happened. And I think that is going to be a net positive for affordability at every price point in the city of Austin, regardless of where you're building.
Do you guys understand the impact of this? This is I was really excited about moderating this panel because this is going to change the way we do business. I mean, it's something that I don't think a lot of us fully comprehend. So Chris, give us the commercial scenario with that.
Okay, and then I wanted to finish up on the single family topic real quick and just kind of visually explain what's going to be built now. Right? Has everybody been into one of those houses where it's 2 stories, but there's actually a 3rd story and it's kind of like a built out attic and the walls are sloped? And if you think about it, all of the new construction around here is 2 stories unless it has one of those built out attics. Zoning allows for 32 feet of height. You can get 3 stories in there, but nobody does it, and that's because of McMansion. It's a nebulous concept called the McMansion tent. It's like an imaginary sloped thing over top of your lot. You can't just build 3 stories wherever you want. Now remember, as FAR increases, as you build more units, impervious coverage for now is staying the same, right? So what this is not doing at this phase at least is taking a 10,000 square foot lot, right, and drastically decreasing the amount of pervious green space. What it is doing is it's going to have architects, or sort of force architects into creating more 3-story units. So I'm envisioning you're going to have a lot more things that look like townhomes, whether that's attached townhomes or maybe they're detached by a few feet. The home initiative also reduced setbacks, so it gives you a little bit more room to work around in, but you have to maintain the same amount of impervious coverage, which all the houses right now under the original or the existing code were maxing out their impervious coverage.
Yeah, so basically you still have impervious cover, but the McMansion limits the use of the space that you have, and this will allow for more efficiency with that space.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it's going to be the condo, and so when we get into the reducing the lot size, one thing I want to emphasize is that we're not going to go down to 2,500 square foot lots and see a whole lot of 3 units on that, right? The purpose of getting smaller lots, whether it's 2,500 or maybe they go all the way down to Houston at 1,400, is to create like a townhome lot, like a 0 lot line kind of thing you might see in a bigger, older city like Chicago or New York. And so instead of having 3 units on one lot and creating a condo to sell them off individually, the reduction in lot size is going to allow developers to subdivide properties into smaller sizes and have more likely 1 unit or maybe 2 units on a lot, on a much smaller lot. So the form is the same. You're still going to end up with a lot of 3-story attached or very closely detached units, and it's a question of whether you own a unit in a condo, a very small condo regime, or you own a unit on your very own lot.
Gotcha. Okay, and so take us through the scenario of commercial now, or what it could be if everything goes as planned.
Okay, so now we're moving away from home and moving back to the changes to compatibility. There's not a whole lot of places to grow, right? We have to grow up. We could keep sprawling into the suburbs, but first of all, that's not Austin's issue. That the city of Austin is focused on the city of Austin. We have to grow up. And right now, obviously, we've talked about compatibility and how that limits that so drastically. Another one of the development bonuses that was passed last year that was overturned by a lawsuit is this one that they called VMU2. It stands for Vertical Mixed Use 2. So right now on most of these corridors, zoning is whatever the underlying zoning is, and it's also vertical mixed use. which essentially says, you've got your height, you've got your FAR, you've got the number of units you're allowed to build per acre, and whatever other restrictions it is. And it basically, it eliminates most of those restrictions. It says you can build a 60-foot box if you wanted to, and you're limited by your impervious coverage, and you're limited by your height, and that's about it. There's no FAR to contend with, there's no units per acre to contend with, and in exchange for that development bonus, you have to offer 10% of your units as affordable housing. Now that's been around for a long time, and most new developments that you see on one of these corridors are using that. Last year they passed VMU2, which takes the existing everything about VMU and says, okay, now if you want to give us 12 to 15%, depending on a couple specifics, affordability instead of 10%, now you can have a 50% height bonus. So all of those 60-foot VMU tracks along South Congress and all those types of corridors can now build up to 90 feet.
90?
Yep. No, of course, subject to compatibility.
Which is the other, yeah.
Right. So that's why they're taking these up together, grouping them together and saying, we're going to do all the notification we have to do, and we're going to do this while we have the votes to do it, and we're going to do it before we all have to worry about campaigning. And we're going to say, we're going to allow VMU2 again, and we're going to cut down on compatibility significantly. And so there's still a little bit of compatibility there. And so if you take a smaller corridor, like I own a lot on South First Street, and I would like to build a taller building there. But as a small corridor, my lot's like 100 feet deep, right? And so it doesn't really matter unless compatibility goes away, my lot's going to be affected by compatibility. And that's a reasonable safeguard, right? Otherwise, you're going to have a 90-foot building really overlooking somebody's house that's as far away from, to me, to the back of this room or less. And so as you get to slightly larger corridors or slightly larger lots, that 90 feet of height becomes a lot more appropriate. And in the conjunction or the combination of these two ordinances passing is going to allow a lot more of those lots to build 90 feet or close to it.
And that's what, like 8 stories of, guys, can you imagine driving down South Lamar and seeing 8-story condos? I mean, yeah, that's what we're looking at here. And that's why this is why I was so excited about this topic. It's like that could happen this year. Now, those values are going to shoot to the roof, right?
Right. I mean, that will increase the by right entitlements as far as how many units you can build on those properties. That will have a significant increase on the value of real estate that is zoned commercial VMU on corridors. I think that's going to be much more, and it will increase the property taxes, all of that stuff that people are debating. I think that's going to be much more pronounced on the commercial side than what home is going to do for lot values on the residential side.
How much of this stuff did you guys know? I'm just curious. Right? I mean, there's so much misinformation there. So we're out of time, but guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
We have a ton of great content that we filmed at the RealtyHack Summit. We're going to be publishing that. You should see one above. If not now, check in next week and like and subscribe for future videos.